While Dick Clark had the nation's youth, Don Cornelius had its soul. But behind the scenes it got personal. Before there was BET, before MTV gave hip-hop a platform, and before TikTok made dance trends global, there were two very different shows that shaped the way America saw youth, music, and culture on television. On one side was American Bandstand, shiny, mainstream, and fronted by the so-called America's oldest teenager, Dick Clark. On the other side was Soul Train, slick, soulful, and led by the smooth-voiced pioneer Don Cornelius. Both were built around dancing, music, and youth, but one catered to suburbia and the other was a revolution in motion. What most people don't realize is that this wasn't just a competition for ratings, it was a battle for representation, for ownership, for visibility in an industry that rarely handed the mic to black creators. So what went down behind the scenes? That's where things got heated and personal. Let's rewind. American Bandstand first aired in the early 1950s, an era when the television industry was still in its infancy. The concept was simple: teens dancing to hit songs, artists lip-syncing their singles, and Dick Clark smiling his way through interviews. It was wholesome, polished, predictable, and overwhelmingly white. Sure, a few black performers made it onto the Bandstand stage, think Smokey Robinson or Chubby Checker. But behind the scenes, there were unwritten rules. Black dancers were not regularly featured, and the show's producers, including Clark, seemed perfectly content with that. Now, fast forward to 1970. Don Cornelius, a former Chicago cop turned journalist, was watching American TV and wondering, why don't we have something that looks like us, sounds like us, moves like us? The answer? Because no one was giving black creatives the opportunity. So Don built it himself. He launched Soul Train in Chicago with a shoestring budget, a dream, and a ton of local talent. It was instantly magnetic. The energy, the music, the dancing, the fashion. It felt like the black community on screen, not as a stereotype, not as a sidekick, but as the main event. In 1971, Soul Train went national, and suddenly there were two music shows in America, one that looked like the suburbs and one that looked like the streets of Chicago, Philly, and Detroit. And that's when things got complicated. When Soul Train started pulling in serious numbers, Dick Clark took notice. His show had dominated music television for nearly 2 decades. Now he was being challenged not by another major network, but by an independent black producer with swagger and a stronghold on black America. Clark wasn't just a host, he was a business mogul. He knew how to move quickly when competition appeared. So, in 1973, ABC quietly launched a new show under Clark's umbrella. It was called Soul Unlimited. Sound familiar? Same format, same idea, but without Don Cornelius, it didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Like, Soul Unlimited wasn't just inspired by Soul Train, it was copying it outright. Many saw it as an attempt to steal the format, water it down, and remove the cultural ownership. Don Cornelius wasn't having it. He spoke out, rare for someone as composed and reserved as he usually was. He publicly denounced Soul Unlimited as an aggressive, unnecessary move that tried to co-opt what Soul Train had already established. And he wasn't alone. Prominent voices in black media and civil rights circles backed him up. Even Reverend Jesse Jackson stepped in, calling the move an insult to black innovation. And here's where things took a turn. Behind closed doors, there were reportedly intense negotiations between Cornelius, ABC executives, and even Clark himself. No one's confirmed exactly what was said in those meetings, but what's known is this: Soul Unlimited disappeared after just a few episodes, silenced, quietly scrubbed from the airwaves. Cornelius had won that round, but the rivalry didn't disappear. It just went underground. What happened with Soul Unlimited exposed something bigger, something that went beyond two music shows. It was a clash between culture and corporations, a question of who gets to profit off black creativity, who gets to shape how America views black music, black fashion, black joy. Cornelius had to fight for every inch of airtime. He dealt with network execs who didn't understand the culture, sponsors who didn't want their brand associated with black performers, stations in the South that refused to air his show at all. Meanwhile, Clark, already rich and well connected, had the backing of massive advertisers, studios, and syndication networks. But even with all his power, he couldn't recreate the authenticity of Soul Train, because authenticity can't be mass produced, and that's what Soul Train had in spades. It was more than a show. It was a statement. While Soul Unlimited flopped, Bandstand continued to air into the late 1980s. Soul Train, on the other hand, lasted until 2006, over 3 decades of showcasing some of the greatest talent in music history. From Marvin Gaye to Janet Jackson, Aretha Franklin to Prince, the Soul Train stage was legendary. But what most fans didn't see was that Don Cornelius carried the pressure of that success on his back. He had full creative control, but that also meant full responsibility. He kept things professional. Even when artists pushed boundaries, he demanded respect respect for the dancers, the music, and the brand. He was a businessman, yes, but also a perfectionist and often a hard person to work with. Some say his intensity was necessary, others say it isolated him. Meanwhile, Clark was expanding his brand. New Year's Eve specials, game shows, award shows, his empire kept growing, and yet the culture belonged to Soul Train. You could feel it in the dance lines, the scramble board, the fashion, the hair, the vibe. It wasn't trying to be mainstream, it was the moment. Here's where the story takes a turn. In 2008, 2 years after Soul Train ended its original run, Don Cornelius sold the rights to the franchise. Some saw it as a necessary move, others saw it as the end of an era. 2 years later, in 2012, Don tragically took his own life after years of health problems and personal struggles. The news stunned the world. Fans remembered the smooth-talking host, but many didn't know the toll the industry had taken on him. In contrast, Dick Clark passed away just a few months later due to a heart attack. He died with his legacy polished, intact, and widely celebrated. But when it comes to impact, the echoes of Soul Train are everywhere. BET's programming, hip-hop's rise, dance culture, the Verzu series, TikTok challenges, Afro beats, fashion, the soul, the pride, the flavor. You can trace it all back to Don Cornelius. He didn't just build a show, he built a blueprint for how Black creators could take control of their image, their platform, and their power. And no matter how hard corporate America tried, it couldn't duplicate that. So who really won? It depends on what you value. Dick Clark had industry connections, he had network support, mainstream visibility, and financial success. Don Cornelius had vision, culture, and ownership. Bandstand may have introduced the Beatles to America, but Soul Train made sure artists like Stevie Wonder, James Brown, and Whitney Houston weren't just seen, they were celebrated. Clark may have been called America's DJ, but Cornelius gave America a mirror and told us to dance. In a battle between mass production and cultural protection, Soul Train didn't just survive, it left a legacy. So the next time you hear someone say they're influenced by the culture, ask them this: did they come through Soul Train or try to copy it? Because while Dick Clark had the nation's youth, Don Cornelius had its soul.